Hey guys, I wanted to do a video about one of the hardest things that I personally felt as I became a Christian. Um, Christian dating was one of the hardest things at the beginning of my walk with God, and just waiting for God to bring me the right person. And I felt really strongly all this week that the Lord put that on my heart to just share my own story. And maybe it'll encourage you to continue to wait for who the Lord wants to bring for you and not get ahead of Him and all that kind of stuff. In November, it'll actually be 11 years that I rededicated my life to the Lord, and I've learned so many things. Every day I'm learning new things. There's different things that I'll read, and this time last year didn't speak to me the way it does today because I'm in a different season of my life, and that's why the Bible is so incredible, because it's always speaking to you. It's living and powerful. The Lord's always speaking into our lives. And when I first got saved, I was pretty out there before, and I dated and was with a lot of different guys, and I didn't know what it meant to be faithful. I didn't really know what love was. I just knew if I wanted someone, I went for it, and that wasn't love. It was just, I loved myself. I was all about myself and lust and all that stuff. So when the Lord got a hold of my life and I completely changed everything, the desires in my heart were different. So I wasn't going out and drinking every single night. I wasn't doing drugs. I wasn't sleeping around anymore. So my friend circle diminished quickly, just because I didn't want to do those things anymore. It wasn't the people. It was, I now recognize that I needed to change, and I wanted to walk with God. I wanted those things weren't just, they weren't in me to want to do anymore. The desire was completely gone to want to behave and go to those places anymore. And with that being said, I started going to church right away, and I started serving in high school ministry and those kinds of things, and it was incredible. And meeting lots of nice Christian guys, obviously, or girls are like, oh, maybe that's the one, and you meet another guy, and oh, Lord, is he the person? And it was just very like that. And my, as I became friends with other Christian girls, like, oh yeah, he's, I'm praying and seeing if that guy's the one for me and all that. And that's totally cool that you do that. And it was, for me, I didn't have anyone asking me out. It was really difficult for me because I always had a relationship. I was with multiple men at the same time, all of my time, when I was not walking with God. So to have someone there all the time, then all of a sudden not have anybody, and it's just the Lord and I, it was just, my attention was just towards the Lord. And it was, for me, it was really hard, because I was brand new at, well, what does this mean? What is waiting on God? What does that really look like? And God's timeline is very different to ours, isn't it? I wish that I knew, and I'm sure if you're waiting for God to bring you the person, you probably wish that you would know when it's going to be too, but the Lord works out His timing, and it's always perfect. For me, that timeline was 7 years. I was single. I didn't date anybody, and it's not because I didn't want to. There were a few guys along the way. Firstly, when I first got saved, I met through a friend of mine, a guy, and he was not a Christian, and I was a new believer, like just rededicated my life, brand new, and we like the same music, we like the same, sort of, things, interests and things like that. Long story short, we hung out a few times, and I really, this was a hard thing I don't always talk about. It's just you always think you're going to save that person. I'll hang out with him, like maybe he'll start coming to church. I'll invite him. And that's not our job. The Lord is the one who's going to bring a man who's going to help you alongside of your walk to become closer to the Lord. He's going to draw you and push you closer to the Lord. It's not our job to do that for the guy. That's not the way that the Lord orchestrated marriage, and that's not the way the Lord intends that to be. That's why he says, do not be unequally yoked with unbelievers. That's why the husband is the head of the house, and not because he's more powerful or anything. It's just the way that the Lord designed it. And when you really look at it that way, it takes the stress off. It's no pressure. But I didn't know that. I thought, oh, maybe he'll start coming to church and maybe this and that. So one day, we were hanging out, and things got to the point where obviously I'm not having sex anymore. I'm not drinking anymore. I'm not living. The old Danielle was dead. I wasn't participating and behaving the way I previously did. So now I'm hanging out with a guy that I really like, and he really likes me. And you get to that point where you're not having a discussion about it, but okay, what you kind of feel the tension, like, where's this going to go? And I realized that the Lord was right. I can't be with a non-believer, because my belief was I want to wait until I'm married to make love to my husband. And you have another person who doesn't believe that, because the Lord isn't really the Lord over their life just yet, or at all. So that was a tough lesson I had to learn, and I had to just tell him that we would just have to be friends. And that was probably the first, maybe 3 or 4 months of becoming a Christian. So after that, I met tons of nice people through church, and nothing ever happened. And along the way, there were a couple of guys who were on paper amazing. Everything that I would want, I guess, whatever that might look like. And it just didn't feel right in my heart. It did not. And it was a long time. And I remember this one day I was driving to work, and I was on the freeway driving, and I was so bummed. All my friends, by the way, this is huge. I've been a hairstylist for 13 years. Obviously, I'm here in Australia now, so I'm not doing hair here. But I did 16 weddings in about 5 or 6 months. I can't remember. It was 5 or 6 months. 16 weddings. I did the hair. I did the makeup. I went to all of my clients' weddings. They're like, why don't you have a boyfriend? And I'm like, why don't you ask God? And every single time, and you probably have people ask you, why are you single? Oh, you love the Lord. And you don't have the answer because the Lord's doing something that you can't understand just yet. And that's where I was. And it was really hard. And I have a heart for those of you who are single and are waiting. And that's why I wanted to share my own story of that, because it is important to be encouraged while you are waiting, because the Lord hasn't forgotten you. So at that time, I did feel forgotten. I felt like I was in the wilderness in a parched land, just like, what is going on? And so I was going to all these weddings, doing all these weddings, and everyone's sharing their story. And that's all I wanted. The Lord was changing me drastically in my life. Things were going really well. And I just was like, I want to share my life with someone. I want to be with a man who loves you, Lord. And so this one day I was driving to work, and I remember exactly where I was on the freeway, and I remember the Lord just speaking to my heart and saying, I have to teach you what faithful is and what love is, and it's by spending time with me, because I'm faithful and I am love. And it was so powerful, and I actually had to pull over on the side of the freeway, and I was crying, and it was so powerful, because as I did spend time with the Lord, I never knew it meant to be faithful to somebody, because I always was with multiple guys at the same time. I didn't know what it meant like to just be with one person and commit myself to that person. And I was learning to do that with the Lord. And he was showing me that he is faithful and he will never let me down. And I had to learn to trust him. And that's always the issue when we worry and when we stress out. It's the issue is that we really don't trust God for what he says and who he is. And I'm speaking to myself. It's a very, in our faith walk, that's what we know it up here, but sometimes we forget, don't we? We need to remember that he is who he says he is, and he is faithful, and the love he demonstrated, he gave himself. So I was like, oh, and I was crying. I was like, okay, Lord, and so I didn't know that journey was going to go on for 7 years. And I had a couple guys, approach me at church at different times and say, the Lord told me that you're my wife and things like that. And that was really interesting to have happen to me. And I told one guy, well, the Lord didn't tell me that. And when he tells me, then I'll have that peace, and it will be confirmed with me too. Like the Lord can tell me that as well. And it was like, when you don't have that peace, when you know that it's right and your like heart is racing, that's what happens to me. Or the Lord confirms. And when you do not have that peace and you do not have that joy, and you are like, no, this is completely wrong. It's something inside of you. It's not right. That's exactly how I felt with these different guys. And they were wonderful, like I said, but they weren't the ones that the Lord had for me. And so finally, doing all these weddings, I'm still not dating anybody. I'm serving the Lord. I'm in women's ministry. I'm just, working and doing all these things. And it was a completely, I had my days where it was awesome. And then I had my time where I was like, man, to wait on the Lord is really a hard thing. But we know one of our favorite Psalms, at least mine is, delight yourself in the Lord and he will give you the desires of your heart. But it says we are to delight in him first, and then he gives us the desire. So as we're delighting in him, as we're spending time with him, as we're getting to know the Lord, the desires that we have in our heart are from him. And I know that because I have that desire, he is faithful. So if you have that desire, he's going to bring you the man that he handpicked for you. So one day I was at church, and there was a new guy who came to work at the church, and my church at that time, this is, like I said, this was how long ago was this? Maybe 4 years ago. He, at my church, he came, and he was Australian, and all the people were talking about him because of his accent, and, obviously we're Americans, so, any accents are, say this and how do you say that and things like that. So I met him just in passing, and a friend introduced him to me, and he ended up coming and getting a haircut one day. And anyways, for one whole year, we hung out in like my group of sphere of friends. It was nothing ever. And at that time I was actually at the School of Worship and, working full time. So I didn't have time to get to know this guy. So when I graduated from School of Worship, Ben, my husband now, he said, I'd really like to take you out on a date and get to know you and celebrate, your, graduating from School of Worship and stuff like that. And I was like, that'd be fun. And like I said, I'd gotten to know him. We were good friends by this point. He was serving at church, and he loved the Lord, and he was hilarious, and all that stuff, but it just wasn't on my radar whatsoever, because I wasn't looking for it. So then we went out one night. I brought one of my girlfriends with me. All three of us went out actually, and we had a great time. My car broke down, and he had to push my car, and just funny stuff like that happened. But right after that, I just could not get him out of my head, and I was just like, Lord, I don't understand this. And it's just funny because he he was totally different than any guy I had ever dated. Looks wise, personality wise, interests. And when you're just used to one way, one type of guy, it's almost like I was blindsided. Like, that's why I didn't expect it. It wasn't, when I met him, I wasn't like, oh, maybe he's the one. He was completely off of my radar. And so we got to know each other more, and spent more time. We go to church together. We obviously served the Lord together and things like that. And he ended up one day just telling me, you know, I really like you a lot, and I felt the same way as him. And we started just praying, and we ended up dating for a year. His family came out from Australia, and I met them, and they were wonderful people. And he ended up proposing to me, and we're engaged for 4 months, and we finally got married. And it's been the most amazing thing. And I never would have thought the Lord would bring me someone like the husband that I have now. He is so gentle. He is so loving. He's so kind. He takes care of me. He loves the Lord. We read the Word together every day. He reads us our devotionals. He prays over me. And this is the thing that really touched me so much, is those 7 years that I was single and God was teaching me, what does it mean to be faithful? What does it mean to love somebody? I had to learn by the Lord himself. He was teaching me who he was, in essence. At the same time, the Lord was preparing my husband, Ben, on the other side of the world, teaching him things that he needed to know, teaching him how to love, teaching him how to be a good husband, teaching him all those things. And the Lord brought Ben all the way from the other side of the world. I'm here now in Australia, but brought Ben all the way over to America on the other side of the world, just for me, I felt like. And maybe that's lame to think that, but the Lord did bring me the desire of my heart, and he brought me the husband that he had chosen. And no one that I met, no one in the places I was going to was the man that God handpicked for me. The Lord brought him to me from the other side of the world, and that was so special. And I'm so glad that I waited for God to bring me the one that he chose for me. I'm so glad that I didn't try to make things happen. I'm so glad that I didn't start dating non-Christians, as lovely as I have friends that are non-believers, and they're lovely. But that's not what God had for me. The guys that I met at church that were great, and I just didn't have the peace of the Lord in my heart, it didn't work out. I'm so glad that I waited, because God brought me the one that he chose for me. And if maybe you're here today and you're feeling forgotten, and you're serving the Lord, and you're just waiting and waiting and waiting, I just want to encourage you to don't give up. Continue to pray, continue to serve the Lord, continue to trust that he has the person for you. He knows the desires of your heart, and he will bring that into fruition. He is faithful. He is so faithful. I used to get discouraged when I had friends that got married straight out of high school and met guys right away, and that wasn't my story. I thought, I'm going to be married when I'm like 21 and have kids and all these things. Next month, actually, it's Ben and I's 2-year wedding anniversary, and I'm going to be 33 this year. That just happened for me. I thought I was going to be married when I'm 20. I'm almost 33. God's timeline is completely different to what I had planned. What you're doing with your life, how you're serving the Lord, when God brings you that person, it's going to just be like, as you're walking on a road, it's like you're walking here, he's walking there, and it's just kind of doing this, and at the right time, it'll come together, and you guys will serve the Lord together. The Lord has a perfect plan. Just continue to wait for him. Don't get ahead of the Lord. Don't try to work things out in your own strength, because it doesn't work out. And then when we try to work things out and run ahead of the Lord, we have Ishmael on our hands. When the Lord told Abraham, just wait, I'm going to give you the promised son. And that didn't happen for years. Abraham was almost as good as dead with his wife. But God was faithful, wasn't he? And in an impossible situation, Ephesians 3, I love it. It says he is able to do exceedingly abundantly above all that we could ever ask or think. So as wonderful as we think a husband could be, or a guy can be, God's able to do exceedingly abundantly above what you even think that person can be. God can do it, and he will do it, but we have to wait and learn to trust and wait that he has a perfect plan. Our plans, where I'm at right now, I had no plan to be here in Australia, and I am. God knew that, I didn't, and I'm so glad that I didn't get ahead of the Lord. I'm so glad that I've had to step one step at a time. Just like we always sing that song, Oceans, Spirit lead me where my trust is without borders. That's such a hard thing to sing. Spirit lead me. Are you really willing to wait and allow God to do a great and mighty thing in your life today? He has a plan for you. He has a plan for me. Don't get ahead of him. Continue to wait. He has not forgotten you. Don't allow Satan to say that. Stay pure. Wait for God to bring you that man. Keep serving him faithfully. Allow him to show you himself. And don't get discouraged. And I would when everyone else was getting married. It's a beautiful thing, and God will bring it into fruition for your life as well. Just keep serving him, keep looking towards him, and allow him to do the work that he's doing in your life, and he's preparing the man for you. Like I said, I am so glad. You don't know who it is, but he is able to do exceedingly abundantly above all that we can ever ask or think. So just remember that he is faithful, and he's going to do it. He who has called you is faithful, and he's the one who will do it. So just trust him. Don't be discouraged. And I hope that my story encourages you today of waiting for 7 years. And God did bring the person that he had for me. Don't give up. He will do it. He will do it. If it's 7 years, 10 years, look at Abraham. It was years. David, he was anointed king, and for 10 years he ran away from Saul, and he didn't sit as king for 10 years. God has a timeline. He is faithful. He cannot deny himself. He cannot go backwards. He cannot not be faithful. It's out of his character. So press on with him. Allow him to do the good work that he's doing in your life. Continue spending time with him in your word. Continue serving the Lord with all of your heart, and he will give you the desires of your heart. Just continue delighting in him. I hope that encourages you today.